There are two drawing aids in AutoCAD called Grid and Snap. They often work together, but you can use them separately from each other as well. Snap is a toggle setting that is either on or off, and you turn this on or off by pressing the F9 button, or by clicking on the Snap icon in the status bar, which is found right here. Right now it's off. When I click it, the icon is highlighted blue, and the command line will tell you that your snap is on. Off, on. What the snap feature does is it restricts your mouse movements to specific increments on a grid. That grid can either be visible or invisible. Right now my grid is visible. You can set these increments to whatever value you need it to be. If you need to draw objects at incremental units or factors thereof, then snapping is a great way to go. It helps you to draw in these increments every time without doubt and without tedious data entry. The snap technique is not very useful though when you are zoomed way out or you're too far away, because the farther you're zoomed out, then the more difficult it will be to see where you're snapping to. So it's a relative thing. You'll have to pay close attention to your coordinates in this case. When you snap, you are snapping to a defined grid. That grid can be made either visible or invisible with a grid feature. It's a toggle, so you can turn it off or on by pressing the F7 key. Grid off or grid on. Or you can go to the status bar and click on the grid icon. Again, when it's on, the grid icon will be highlighted blue. A lot of times I like to work with a grid on because, well, it's a grid and it helps me to draw. It's like working with graph paper to a certain degree. With snap off, I can't select any of these lines. And as I pan around, they move. If I zoom in or zoom out, conduct a regen, meaning regen my screen. I can't do anything with them. They're just a visual aid, but that's okay. It's the same way with drawing on graph paper. They're just a visual aid. When the snap feature is turned on, it's also a visual guide, not just an aid, but it's a guide, and it will tell you where you're going to snap to, as long as you set your grid to be the same increments or units as your snap. Now, to change the snap in the grid settings, you need to open up the Drafting Settings dialog box. You can do this by right-clicking on the O snap or grid icon in the status bar. Right-click and go to the settings. There are a lot of different tabs in here to set up a lot of different things, but what we're worried about right now is the Snap and Grid tab. If you're on one of these others, or you can't see it, you have buttons over here that will scroll you through all of your different tabs. But we want the Snap and Grid tab. You can turn your grid or snap off or on right by here, and you can change the settings throughout. In the grid area of the tab, you can select the number of units each snap location will be apart. You can make the X or the horizontal distance to be the same as the Y, or you can make them different. You can set up your snap and grid increments to be the same, or you can make them different. I would tend to try to keep them the same, but you don't have to. So right now, the way our settings are in this file is that you have a snap point and a grid point at every half of a unit. And your grid is drawing a major line, these thick lines, every 5 units. Now you can change these to show where they're being displayed or where they're not in 2D model space, 3D model space, block editor, etc. You can also change it to subdivide below your grid. You can follow the dynamic UCS or not. So as you see here, as I zoom in and out, it keeps redrawing the grid with those settings. If you go back to your drafting settings window and you uncheck this box right here, the adaptive grid, it won't adapt anymore. As you zoom in and out, it stays at the size you've told it to, which is very useful from time to time. With Snap on, as you can see, my cursor automatically snaps to lines on the grid. That's very useful. That's like drawing on graph paper. So I can draw from just about any point on this grid and know that I'm drawing accurately. Note the coordinates in the bottom left of my screen. There aren't any decimals being used because we don't have our grid set up that way. It only goes to 0 or 0.5 because we have everything set to 0.5 units. So I guess some decimals are being used in this case. But what I mean is it doesn't go way out. Like now, when I'm free to move around, this is what's happening. So when you turn the grid on, you can see that a lot of times it has limits and sometimes it doesn't. You can change that by changing your limits. I changed my limits, and now I'm going to my drafting settings. You can type in OS, and that'll take you to Object Snap, but then you just go to the Snap and Grid tablet. And you can tell it to follow the limits. So if you want it to go beyond your limits, turn this on here. But now we're going to turn it off. And now it will only show the grid and our limits. What are the limits? Well, your limits, quite literally, will limit where you can draw at. There are a lot of different uses for limits, and a lot of them aren't really used as much anymore because of other tools and features that have been put into AutoCAD over the years. But you can set your limits by just typing in the word limits. And then you can manually type in your coordinates, or you can just pick a point. And you'll pick your bottom left corner, and then your top right. And this is your drawing area. This is where the grid will be displayed, and this is where you are limited to. Many users find the snap and grid features to be annoying. However, many users find them to be very useful. I would agree with both perspectives. The ability to control where your crosshairs go without having to think about it is very handy when you're first learning to use AutoCAD. Having a grid to help you visualize the length and the location of your drawing objects is also useful. Learning how big something is on the screen can take some time. Many users have a hard time adapting to that. So having a visual aid could help you in this case. Eventually, and it may take some time though, you will be able to understand how big something is on your screen. Don't worry if it takes you a while. In fact, some people never get the hang of it, but that's okay.